Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the meeting of the Metropolitan Planning Organization. Sylvia, could you do a roll call, but at the same time, let's take action on minutes of February 22nd. So go ahead. Yeah, what's this?
Move to approve.
We have a move to approve. Is there a second? A second. Thank you, Sylvia. If you take the roll and
Yes,
the approvals.
we will, and at the same time, we're adding people, so I may miss a couple of folks. Let me just grab the last two here. Oh, here's one. Linda here. Do you know who Abby is?
Oh, that must be Danielle Ivancic,
Okay, what town?
Bedford.
Thank you. New for me.
Yep.
All right. Good morning, everyone. For those that are joining virtually, we're just doing a roll call and a meeting minutes simultaneously, and I'll go by town. Right now, I don't believe we have anyone from Auburn. Is that true? Okay, let's move to Bedford. In the room, we have Bill DeShaco.
Here.
Charlie Fairman.
Here and I.
Bill, did you want to say it?
Aye, yes, I can.
Thank you. And online, we have Danielle Ivancic. Danielle, you're muted if you want to.
There you go. Yeah, Danielle Ivancic.
Thanks, Danielle, for being with us. And did you have a say on the minutes?
Yes.
Okay, great. I missed it. I'm sorry. Candia, we have Al Hall in the room.
Aye and yes.
Thanks, Al. Oh, it's coming. From Chester, we have Andrew Haddock online.
Andrew Haddock, and I abstain.
Thanks, Andrew. Did I miss Munson?
She just arrived.
Oh, Deb Munson just snuck in.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Deb. Deerfield, we have Bob Cody.
Present and yes.
Thanks, Bob. From Derry, in the room, we have Jeff Moulton
Here and yes.
and Richard Tripp.
Here and abstain.
And online, we have, hold on, John O'Connor.
Present and yes.
Thanks, John. Francistown, virtually, we have Alfred Eisenberg.
Yes, and here.
Thank you, Alfred, and Linda Kuhnhart. Just have to unmute, Linda. Maybe Linda stepped away a second.
No, I forgot what my unmute thing was. Present and yes.
Okay. From Goffstown in the room, we have David Pierce.
Yes, on the minute.
Thanks, David. And online, we have Joanne Duffy.
Here and abstain.
Thank you. From Londonderry online, oh, sorry, in the room, we have Martin Srugas.
Here and abstain.
Thanks, Martin. Online, we have Deb Levins.
Present and yes.
Thanks, Deb. And Arthur Rudd.
I am present and yes on the minutes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We also have Lynn Wiles.
Yes, I'm present and I abstain on the minutes.
Thank you, Lynn. From Manchester in the room, we have Peter Capano.
Yes.
We have Ray.
Here.
Ray
Yeah.
Ray Clement. Thank you, Ray. Don Waldron. We have Don. Oh, I thought we had Don. Oh, goodness. We have Dan O'Neill. Online.
Here and abstain.
Anyone else from Manchester online? Okay. From New Boston.
We have Kevin McHugh.
But he's a guest today.
Yes. Right now I'm doing just commissioners.
Very good.
Yes, I have greeted Kevin.
I thought you would have.
But you abstained for the minutes.
Thank you. From New Boston in the room, we have Mark Sunan.
Here and yes.
We have anyone? Oh, wow. More. Okay. We'll go back to those. Let's see. That was Mark. From Wyndham in the room, we have Peter Griffin.
Yes. On
Aye.
minutes and present.
And am I missing anyone?
The one,
Oh, sure. Ed Lapointe from Wyndham.
yeah, I understand.
Thanks, Ed. And who just joined us, we have Bill Herman from Auburn.
Present.
And also on the minutes, Bill.
Good morning, Sylvia. This is Brian Battaglia.
Yes, Brian, I was coming to you. Anything on the minutes? We're voting on the minutes. A lot of feedback, I have no idea. All right, and then from, let's see, from New Hampshire DOT, we have William Rose.
Good morning, present and yes on the minutes.
Great, and Mike Whitten from MTA.
I'm here and I vote yes.
All right, non-voting members, we have Leigh Levine in the room. And I think is that it? Did I miss anyone?
Good morning, Jessica Wilcox with New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services.
Thanks, Jessica.
We also have Kevin McHugh as a guest.
Yes, that has been noted.
Hi,
Okay.
Sylvia. James Vayo from Planning Commission. Sarah's in the room.
Right, and we have several staff. We have Carl Eppich, Adam Lasney, Camp Rollman, Zach Swick, and Tammy Zamoyski, myself, Linda, and Nate.
What about Craig Tufts?
Oh, and Craig Tufts.
Hi, I'm from Central Planning Commission.
Okay, thank you. Got it all.
Okay, Sylvia, thank you. Do we have any old business to discuss?
And for the record, we just added Marcus Consfleon from Manchester.
I do not believe we have any old business, do we, Sylvia?
No.
Okay, let's move on to new business, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and Carl Eppich will be speaking on that.
Actually, Peter, we're fortunate that Leigh Levine, our colleague
Oh.
from Federal Highway Administration.
Yeah, I was just going to introduce him, but he's right there in the room. And
Leigh, welcome. Thank you.
there you go. I think Leigh's been with us a while, and he presented to the TAC last week, and I'll let him get right to it with Federal Highway.
All right, I'm just starting to try to share. Over here, I'm not sure why this is.
So let me,
Here,
yeah, I think you're on like extend.
we had to do
We
certain.
might need to move to duplicate to make this a little bit easier temporarily.
Well, the problem was
Adam may be prepared to share as well if it gets too.
James had to do some things so that we didn't have flashing. So you are playing with fire by shifting.
If you do have problems with flashing, you can just change the camera to the laptop momentarily while you do your presentation.
Can those of you on Zoom see the full screen of the presentation?
Yep.
Okay.
We should make it speaker so that we can see. That's all right. Go ahead.
Leigh, it's all yours. All right. All right. Here.
A little bit tricky, right? So your microphone's right in front of you on the little dot over by the table.
This is fine. Oh, that's the microphone.
That's your microphone. Just so you know.
A little closer.
Yes.
All right. Well, good morning, and thank you all for allowing me an opportunity here to talk about our new federal legislation. As mentioned, I presented the same slides to your TAC meeting, and great, had a nice discussion, good questions. There's a lot of information to run through here. The original slide deck was over 70 slides. I have narrowed it down to 35, so you're welcome. But it's still a lot to talk about because there's a lot of legislation. We'll go through all of that. It's 1,039 pages of legislation. We'll go through page by page.
Speak up a little.
Speak up? Okay. All right. So let's just get started here. Yes, I know how to work. All right. So the new legislation reauthorizing all the federal aid programs is we're referring to it now as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law or Bill, but it's also known as the IIJA. I forget what the first word is there. It's covered. It's Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So either one of those names, it's the same thing. And this is the program that authorizes all the federal aid highway programs to help New Hampshire improve the roads and bridges. And we're going to be going through a lot of new programs, as I said. A lot of what's in here is a continuation of what's already under our current authorization or the previous authorization. So what I'm doing is highlighting the new stuff, the new programs, and there's, as I mentioned, there's quite a few. So we'll get started here. Okay, so we're talking about transportation here today, the main part, but as noted here, you know, there's a lot of other infrastructure that's addressed with this legislation, including water, drinking water, wastewater, clean energy, etc. But aside from that, about $550 billion in new federal infrastructure total investment here. Really a once in a generation type of investment in this infrastructure. It's designed to grow the economy, enhance our competitiveness, create jobs. On average, it's estimated around 2 million jobs per year from this legislation. So these are some of the high points of the highway provisions that are in the legislation. And we're providing 5 years, 5 federal fiscal years of funding. It allows people to plan for the future. $350 billion over those 5 years for highway programs. Highway Trust Fund is funding most of it, but we still haven't figured out how to keep the Highway Trust Fund solvent and keep pace with our spending. So there is some general funds that are applied to make sure that we fully fund this legislation. More than a dozen new highway programs, and I'll be talking about those. And some of these programs are formula programs, addressing resilience, carbon reduction, bridges, EV, charging infrastructure. And then some of the programs I'll talk about are discretionary, so they're competitive grant programs, many of them funding the same types of things. Big focus on safety, bridges, climate change, and resilience. That's kind of 2 things that are new in project delivery. And one of the things that's really transformative about the legislation is that there's a lot more opportunities, which we'll go through here, for local governments and kind of other non-traditional partner agencies and stakeholders to access the funding. You know, most of our funding traditionally goes to the state. Some of it goes to locals. But with this legislation, there's a lot more funding that's kind of opened up to other entities, including local governments. And as mentioned, trying to keep the Highway Trust Fund solvent, so there's that $90 billion transfer from the general fund to do that. So this, I think, kind of gives you a really good idea of what's transformative about the legislation. You can see all of these programs and how many of them are accessible to other folks besides just the state DOTs. So you've got a lot of programs here that are can be accessed by MPOs, by local governments, tribal governments, authorities like port authorities, for example, turnpike authorities, territories, and federal lands management agencies too. So this doesn't include all these programs, but you can see that there's quite a few here that are directly accessible to entities besides just state DOTs, our traditional partners. So I'll go through a couple of slides on the apportioned programs. These are the formula programs. We'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about some changes to existing federal aid programs that you might have heard of: the transportation alternatives, AICP, safety funds, and congestion mitigation air quality program. So this slide shows the 8 apportioned or formula or contract authority programs, including the 2 new ones on the end of the slide there in green. SNHPP is a mainstream kind of formula program to support the national highway system. Surface Transportation Block Grant Program is a really very broadly eligible category of funds. Just about anything you could do that's federal aid eligible, you could do with those funds. The AICP program focused on safety, and then CMAQ, congestion mitigation, air quality. PL funds refer to the Metropolitan Planning Funds, so the funds that support the activities of the MPO here. NHFP is a formula freight focused program. Projects that are identified in the statewide freight plan are eligible for those NHFP funds. And then I'll talk a little bit later about these 2 new formula programs, the Carbon Reduction Program and the Protect Formula Program, which really addresses resiliency, focuses on resiliency. All right, so some changes to the Transportation Alternatives Program. You're probably familiar. This is the program that supports bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure here in New Hampshire. So we see some increases in funding, setting it at 10% of the total STBG funds for each fiscal year. There's a little bit of an increase here in the portion of these funds that are directly sub-allocated to different areas based on population. So that's a change. Continues to allow states to transfer funds from the TA program to any other apportioned program, and then allows states to use up to 5% of available funds to administer the TA program. Eligible projects, reaffirming eligibility for safe routes to school projects and activities. Add some activities relating to vulnerable road user safety assessments. And then adds as eligible entities, MPOs representing a population less than 200,000. So that would be this MPO. Nonprofit entities and states at the request of another eligible entity, so partnering projects. And then subject to certain requirements, provides for about a federal share of up to 100%, allows those HSIP funds, also federal funds to be used towards the non-federal share for TA projects. And then allows non-federal requirements to be met on an aggregate basis, kind of a tapered match approach to this. So those are some changes to the TA TAP program. And now I'll talk a little bit about the HSIP program. Some changes. Adds eligibility for specified safety projects, including some non-infrastructure type projects related to education, research, enforcement, etc. Modifies the definition of highway safety improvement project by adding, clarifying some project types, including rail highway grade separation projects, traffic control devices for bike and beds, and roadway improvements that separate motor vehicles from vulnerable road users, bikes and beds. The HSIP, the new requirements talk about having states complete a vulnerable road user safety assessment, and adds a new special rule for states with total annual VRU fatalities comprising greater than 15% of the total annual crash fatalities in the state. So that's an overview of some of the changes to the HSIP program. And here's some changes to the CMAQ program. Congestion mitigation and air quality program. So it's the program that's focused on reducing congestion and emission reduction benefits also. Some new eligible projects under CMAQ, including shared micromobility, so bike share, shared e-scooters are now eligible for support. Purchase of diesel replacements, purchase of medium zero emission vehicles and related charging equipment. Interesting one, modernization rehab of a lock and dam or marine highway corridor. Those are all some new eligible projects. CMAQ funds can be used for rail and transit operating assistance without a time limitation. So there used to be a 3-year limit on using CMAQ funds to support transportation, public transportation operations. Now there's no longer that limit in association with certain projects. And equity is addressed here. So there's a requirement to the maximum extent practicable, prioritizing disadvantaged and low-income populations when obligating funds to reduce particulate matter 2.5 measurement. We don't have non-attainment areas in New Hampshire that have that are PM non-attainment, so that doesn't really apply to New Hampshire. Those are some changes in the CMAQ program. And now we'll move on to a couple of new safety programs and then some other safety related provisions. So here's a new program. It's discretionary, so competitive grant program supporting local initiatives to prevent transportation related deaths, serious injuries on roads and streets. Eligible entities here, MPO, political subdivisions, so local governments are eligible entities, tribal governments. These funds can be used for safety action plans, comprehensive safety action plans, so essentially a planning grant, and then planning, design, development activities for infrastructure projects and other strategies identified in that safety action plan. So this is sort of a non-capital source of funds. Safety. Not less than 40% of total funding for each fiscal year can go to planning grants, and requires considering some other factors, the likelihood of the project significantly reducing health, serious injuries for various road users. So that is the Safe Streets and Roads for All discretionary program that is new. Here's another new discretionary program focusing on wildlife crossings. It's a pilot program. So this is supporting projects that seek to reduce the numbers of wildlife vehicle collisions and improving habitat connectivity. A lot of different eligible entities for these funds, as you can see there. Any eligible projects or any projects that are designed to reduce wildlife vehicle collisions. And then some other key provisions, not less than 60% of grant funds for projects in rural areas, and a few other provisions there, as you can see, for this pilot program. So that is the Wildlife Crossing Pilot Program that is new. And these are some other new kind of more general safety related provisions that are in the legislation. Provisions in the new law define complete streets with standards and policies, requires each state and MPO to carry out transportation planning activities related to complete streets or multimodal travel. So there's some thresholds here for spending. So the state, the law says that at least 2.5% of SPR, or state planning and research funds, have to go towards these activities. For the MPO, it's at least 2.5% of your metropolitan planning or PL funds. And then there's a couple of provisions here on the manual and uniform traffic control devices, kind of the Bible of traffic control. Adds a provision here that talks about inclusion and mobility for all users. Requires an update within 18 months, every 4 years thereafter. And then requires the first update to provide for protection of vulnerable road users to the greatest extent possible. So these provisions on the MUTCD are kind of designed to address vulnerable road users. Those are some other safety related provisions. Quite a few, as you can see, new programs addressing climate and resilience. So we'll go through these to give you an awareness of all of that, and then talk about some other more general provisions. So this was one of the new formula provisions that I referred to earlier, the carbon reduction program. So this purpose of this is to provide funding for projects to reduce transportation emissions or the development of carbon reduction strategies. States are the recipients for these funds. It's apportioned by formula to the states. 65% of these funds are suballocated by population. And it requires the states, in consultation with MPOs, to develop and update every 4 years a carbon reduction strategy and submit it to the US DOT for approval. And then US DOT must certify that the state strategy meets all statutory requirements. So that is the carbon reduction formula program. This is another new program, PROTECT, which is an acronym promoting resilient operations for transformative, efficient, cost-saving transportation, otherwise known as PROTECT. So this program has a formula aspect to it, but it also has a discretionary grant program or aspect to it. For the formula funds, we're looking at purposes, planning, resilience improvements, community resilience, evacuation routes, and at-risk coastal infrastructure. States are the recipients for this program for the formula funds. Some other key provisions: highway, transit, and certain port projects are eligible. If the state develops a resilience improvement plan and incorporates it into their long-range transportation plan, then there's a higher federal share that's allowed. No more than 40% of construction for new capacity, so there's that limit, and no more than 10% for development phase activities. So that is the Formula PROTECT program. This is the discretionary grant program. Pretty much the same purpose and focus for this, although as you can see, there's a lot more eligible entities for the discretionary grants under this category. Very similar in terms of eligible projects and provisions and so forth. So that is the discretionary grant side of the PROTECT program. Another discretionary program, charging and fueling infrastructure program. So the purpose here is to deploy electric vehicle charging, as well as other types of alternative fuel facilities, infrastructure, along designated alternative fuel corridors. Eligible entities include states, MPOs, local governments, etc. So the eligible projects for this program are acquisition and installation of publicly accessible EV charging or alternative fuel infrastructure. Operating assistance for that infrastructure is eligible for the first 5 years after installation. And also acquisition and installation of traffic control devices. And then some other key provisions there. The requirement to redesignate alternative fuel corridors and establish a process to regulate and redesignate those corridors is included. We'll talk a little bit more about the alternative fuel corridors in connection with another program too. Here it is. So this is a formula program also focused, or I guess specifically focused on electric vehicle deployment of EV charging infrastructure. and establishing an interconnected network to facilitate data collection, access, and reliability. The recipients for the formula funds here are the states. Same shares as regular other federal aid highway apportionments. Funded projects for this program have to be located along designated alternative fuel corridors. And in New Hampshire, that includes now all of the interstate facilities in New Hampshire, as well as other principal arterial routes. Nate provided what some of those were at the TAC meeting. I'm not familiar with what they all are in the region. The state has to submit a plan to DOT, US DOT, describing how they're going to use these funds. So it's a deployment plan that's required. And we just had guidance issued actually recently. For a lot of these programs, we're still waiting on a lot of guidance and rules to come forth. For this one, we did receive some guidance recently, and I distributed that to all the MPOs and RPCs. And the state, and this deployment plan for these funds that's required is due August 1st. So Hampshire DOT is already in the process of trying to work on developing that deployment plan for these funds in order to get these funds, make these funds available. This legislation also established this US DOT Department of Energy Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. So the deployment plan that New Hampshire DOT is going to develop will be reviewed by this joint agency and joint office, I should say. And just a few days ago, we had a nice sort of conference call, Teams meeting with folks from this joint office and New Hampshire DOT to kind of get started on this process and answer questions. So I think we're off to a pretty good start with that.
Leigh?
Yes.
Just, I guess I'll note what the designated alternative fuel corridors are. Just pulled it up. So all three interstates, 89, 93, and 95 in New Hampshire, as well as State Route 9, State Route 11, State Route 12, State Route 16, State Route 101, the Effie Everett Turnpike, US Route 2, US Route 4, and US Route 302. Those are the only designated alternative fuel corridors in New Hampshire to this point.
Thank you. And we're actually going through another round 6 of designating these corridors. So New Hampshire DOT and New Hampshire DES kind of coordinating on that, figuring out whether they want to designate anything further in New Hampshire in terms of this network. So another new program, congestion relief program, discretionary grants, focusing on multimodal solutions to reduce congestion and the related economic and environmental costs. This is for congested metropolitan areas with an urbanized area population over 1 million, which we don't really have in New Hampshire other than the Boston urbanized area where it incurs into, or crosses the border into New Hampshire. But eligible entities include the state, MPOs, and cities or municipalities. Eligible projects, planning, design, implementation, and construction. So, we're talking about large urbanized areas. So this program is kind of looking to employ congestion management systems, including HOV toll lanes, pricing strategies, mobility services, that kind of thing. Incentive programs that encourage carpooling, non-highway travel during peak periods, or travel during non-peak periods. Subject to certain requirements, approval by the Secretary, provides for tolling on the interstate system as part of our project carried out with a grant under this program. So that's something else that's new here. And then some other sort of general provisions of the law related to climate and resilience. Requires EV charging infrastructure installed using Title 23 funds to provide for non-proprietary charging connectors. requires the Secretary to U.S. Department of Transportation Secretary to prepare a report on emerging alternative fuel vehicles and infrastructure, including an evaluation of emerging alternative fuel vehicles, identify areas where emerging alternative fuel infrastructure will be needed, estimate the future need for emerging alternative fueling infrastructure, etc. So at some point that report will be issued. And then for the Federal Highway Administration, we issue a conditions and performance report. The new law requires this report to address resilience needs. So that's something new for federal highways that we'll be doing. And now a couple of new bridge programs that are included in the legislation I'll talk about here, Bridge Formula and Bridge Investment Program. So this is a new formula program focused on replacing, rehabbing, preserving, protecting bridges on public roads. Recipients for these funds are states. Distribution formula, 75% based on relative cost of replacing states' poor condition bridges, 25% based on relative cost of rehabbing states' fair condition bridges, but each state receives at least $45 million under this program for the 5 years of the authorization. Some other key provisions, benefits for off-system, non-federal aid, highway eligible projects, bridge projects, 15% of funds reserved for such projects, 100% federal share if owned by a local agency or federally recognized tribe, and then a set aside here for tribal transportation facilities. So the normal federal aid share is the 80-20 split. This would be some allowance for a higher percentage here, up to 100%. And this is sort of another program focused on bridges, but it's discretionary. Improving bridges and culvert conditions as well, safety, efficiency, reliability. You can see here, pretty long list of eligible entities for these funds. Eligible projects, replacing, rehabbing, preserving, or protecting one or more bridges on the National Bridge Inventory, and projects to replace or rehabilitate culverts to improve flood control and habitat connectivity. And some other key provisions here as well. So that's the Bridge Investment Discretionary Program. And then we have a couple of new programs that are focused on equity. So we'll cover those here. This is an interesting program. So this program is designed to, I would say, address some of the wrongs that have been done to disadvantaged communities over the years. As we built our interstate, there are many examples of routing through disadvantaged low-income minority neighborhoods and even middle-class neighborhoods, and a lot of those negative impacts that occurred over the years as we built our interstate system. This is a program that's designed to kind of reconnect those communities that may have been negatively impacted by previous projects. So we're restoring community connectivity by removing, retrofitting, or mitigating highways or other transportation facilities that create barriers. And about half of the funding from our Highway Trust Fund, half from general funds. Eligible entities, you can see planning grants, quite a few eligible entities. For the capital side, the owner of an eligible facility and can partner with any of the eligible entities. So some of these, the type of projects you might see for this program would be like, you may have heard of caps over interstates that kind of create that connectivity that was adversely impacted by the roadway. So caps or lid type projects, that would be an example of an eligible project here. And this is a new discretionary grant focused on rural areas. So the purpose here is to improve and expand surface transportation infrastructure in rural areas, increase connectivity, improve safety, reliability for people and freight movement, and generate regional economic growth, improve quality of life. Eligible entities here include the state, rural transportation planning organizations, local governments, tribal governments. So eligible projects, highway, bridge, tunnel projects that are eligible under these other formula programs that I've mentioned would be eligible here. Highway freight projects that are eligible under the freight formula program, HFP. HSIP projects would be eligible. And projects on publicly owned highway or bridge improving access to certain facilities that support economies of rural areas. And then integrated mobility management system, transportation demand management, or on-demand mobility services. So some of this program, other provisions setting aside a certain amount of funds here for small projects, and some other provisions as well. That is the Rural Surface Transportation Discretionary Grant Program. And a couple other new significant infrastructure programs here. This one, as you might guess from the name, mega projects. If you go down to the bottom of the slide, you'll see, 50% set aside for projects costing more than 100 million, but less than 500 million. And the rest of it for 500 million or more. So this is for big projects, as you can see.
Bigger than the state.
Yeah, mostly, yeah, right. So single year, or because these are large projects, multi-year grant agreements for eligible projects. Pretty nice list of eligible entities for these funds as well. Highway bridge projects on the multimodal freight network or the NHS. Freight intermodal or freight rail projects are eligible if they have a public benefit. Shell highway grade separation or elimination projects. Intercity passenger rail projects, certain public transportation projects as well. That is the mega project discretionary program. And here's the local and regional project assistance program. This is also a discretionary grant program, providing projects with significant local or regional impact. Pretty long list there of eligible entities with this program as well. Highway bridge projects that are eligible for any federal aid program are eligible for this program. Public transportation projects, passenger or freight rail projects, port infrastructure, surface transportation components of an airport. See a lot of different kinds of eligibilities, pretty broad, I would say, with this category. And as it says at the bottom there, codifies the existing RAISE program, which we know Manchester has recently received some funds from. So. All right, moving on. Changes to metropolitan planning, MPO planning, that are part of the legislation, and a couple new programs, pilot programs here. So here's some changes to how MPOs work. One being MPO representation. So this is a new requirement to consider equitable, proportional representation of population or metropolitan planning area when the MPO designates officials or representatives for the first time. So I think that's key. So this would be a new MPO. Everybody else is sort of grandfathered in. Consistency of planning data. So when more than one MPO is serving an urbanized area, this requires those MPOs to ensure consistency of the planning data to the maximum extent. Public participation. The legislation specifically calls out, encouraging MPOs to use social media and web-based tools for public participation. Travel demand data and modeling. There's requirements for USDOT to support states and MPOs travel demand data and modeling, including a study data and an evaluation tool. And then some spending thresholds here. So a requirement that each MPO use at least 2.5% of their funds apportioned for metropolitan planning on one or more activities to increase safe and accessible options for multiple travel modes for people of all ages and abilities. That is also. And another pilot program that's focused on the project prioritization process, discretionary funds. So this is a pilot program to support data-driven approaches to planning that can be evaluated for public benefit. Eligible entities include states and MPOs serving urbanized areas with a population greater than 200,000. So grants of up to $2 million are available here to develop and implement a publicly accessible, transparent prioritization process for selecting projects. And then recipients that have met funding requirements can then use remaining funds for any transportation planning purpose. That is the new prioritization process pilot program. Another new pilot program. So this program is focused on developing, acquiring open source accessibility data sets with measures of level of access by multiple transportation modes. Also, purpose here is to provide the data to participating states, MPOs, and rural transportation planning organizations as well. And then using this data to help those entities improve their transportation planning by measuring the level of access to important destinations for different demographic groups or freight commodities as well. Then assessing the change in accessibility that would result from new transportation investments. Eligible entities include the state, MPOs, and regional, non-MPO, regional transportation planning organizations as well. And then it requires, the law requires FHWA to report to Congress on results of the program as well. That's the Transportation Access Pilot Program. That is it. It's a lot of information. You know, we're still waiting on rules, guidance, etc. for the most part, other than the electric vehicle infrastructure program. We do have some guidance on that one now. But, you know, and for these discretionary programs, as the notices of funding opportunities are released, I'll make sure that I get that information out to the MPO here and they can get it out to all of you guys, because as you've seen, there's a lot of programs now. There's more programs now that are directly accessible to the local community. It's one of the big deals about this legislation.
So Leigh, are you entertaining questions now?
Yeah, if there's time, I'm happy to do that.
Okay, just as a policy I put forth and I didn't enforce in the past, if you're going to ask questions, either calling in from the outside or here, could you just give your name and what community you represent? Leigh, I'm chairman of Southern New Hampshire Planning. I'm from Windham. Has the 5-year window is what this revolves around. There's a tendency that I think, oh, wow, we have all this money. And then at the end of 5 years, it's like, have we overbuilt? Do we find that we do not have enough money to maintain what we have built? Has DOT looked at it in that way? And another question is that I see the word discretionary. Like as people know, I'm a great rail advocate, freight and passenger. If this New Hampshire wants to say, we do not want to devote any money at all to freight, is that acceptable to the federal government, and can they devote it all to highways? Now that I've given you 2 bombshell questions.
Let me start with the last question was about not having to spend.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the discretion, anything that's discretionary, there's no obligation.
Okay.
The formula funds, you know, there are some formula funds that are more focused on freight, specifically on freight project development.
Mm-hmm.
Those formula funds that I mentioned that are accessible to the state, the SNHPC funds, and projects that are identified in the statewide freight plan. Those are the projects that are eligible for those funds, as an example. So, you know, offhand, I can't really think of another formula funding category that is focused on freight. There's there's this surface transportation block grant funds that I said are very broad in terms of eligibility. As I said, basically anything that's middle aid eligible, you can do with those funds. So it's very flexible. But the NHFP funds, I think, are the only ones that I'm aware of that are really focused on freight projects that enhance freight.
Freight meaning roads.
It could be, yeah, well, it could be roads, it could be multimodal, intermodal facilities. There's lots of different kinds of projects that you can do with those funds.
Okay. I have more, but I'll restrain myself. Other questions from someone in the room?
You had a first question.
Yes, the first question is, has DOT looked beyond the 5-year window
Right, in terms of,
when these funds are no longer available?
yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, altogether, the funding is about 28% higher than the previous FAST Act.
Okay.
So there's more money. And what I talked about here was kind of the highlights of what's new. So there's also a lot more money that's provided for, preservation. But it's always something to keep in mind, I think, as you say, you build something new, there's and also, you have to have enough funds to complete the project within the time frame anticipated for the project. So those are kind of basic federal aid requirements. But yeah, it's a good question. It's something definitely you want to think about as you're creating new infrastructure. Is, what it's going to take to maintain.
Additional questions for Leigh? Okay.
Jeff Moulton, Dairy. Has DOT looked at the marketplace to see if there are the resources, engineering, trades to do this extra work?
Well, that's a good question. William, would you like to weigh in on that one?
Sure. Yes, it's a constant topic of conversation, and we are engaged with ACEC on figuring out the best way to allocate the available resources to accomplish the things that we want to accomplish. Less focused on the federal funding regulation, the recent legislation that Leigh just presented on, and more along the lines of what we're proposing to undertake for work in the 10-year plan.
Okay. Yes, Bill.
Yes, Bill Lashaka from Bedford. I follow up on that. If I understood you correctly, then you're having problems. This is directed to Mr. Ross. You're having problems finding people and assigning them for tasks you already have planned for 10 years. Then how can we sit here and consciously say that we're going to look for the next 5 years and spend billions of dollars when we can't even handle something in 10 years?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes. Good. Yeah, so the bipartisan infrastructure legislation and the 10-year plan overlap. As we started the 10-year plan development process over a year ago now, almost 2 years ago, we were already considering the new funding amounts that were going to be available to us in the federal funding legislation. And we're already engaging in conversations to make sure that we are able to accomplish the work that we've laid out in the 10-year plan.
Next question from inside the room. Any? Yes.
So Mark Sudden from New Boston. Does the new congestion relief fund or program allow for part-time shoulder use? New Hampshire is sort of unique in that we don't have a lot of AM, PM commute problems. We have recreational commute problems.
Yeah, I have to say I don't know. We're still waiting on a lot of information to come. So we have the law, but guidance, rulemaking is yet to happen at this point. So I can't really say. Like I said, we have some guidance on the NEVI program, electric vehicle infrastructure program. That was released recently. But for a lot of these other programs, we're still kind of waiting. Because it's a good question. I don't have an answer at this point. But as the rules come out, as the rulemaking process comes out, there's notices of rulemaking, notices of funding opportunities for all. the Make sure I get that information from the MPO. and get it out to everybody.
Peter,
I have a kind of a technical question. One of the programs.
where are you from?
Oh, I'm from Manchester. One of the programs was as eligible or urban MPOs less than 200,000. And another one was urban MPOs greater than 200,000. Where exactly do we as an MPO fit?
You're under 200,000.
And is that because we literally that's the population of the 15 communities, or does the urban slice some off?
It's the urbanized area, which
It's the Manchester urbanized area, which we have a map of. One of these maps on the wall shows the Manchester urbanized area. The population of the Manchester urbanized area, which goes beyond the city of Manchester, because there are parts of Bedford, Londonderry. Londonderry,
Goffstown, and
most
Bedford,
of
we're pretty close to
Londonderry,
200,000.
well, actually, so not to go too deep in the weeds. Most of Londonderry, most of Derry, parts, large sections of Windham are actually in the Nashua urbanized area. The Nashua urbanized area is over 200,000, and we participate in a cooperative effort with our colleagues, because there are different rules and regulations that at the federal level that go into administering an over 200,000 MPO. The Manchester urbanized area, which is our primary responsibility, goes as far north as Bow, Allenstown, and Pembroke, and covers much of Manchester, a large portion of Bedford, and we have a map on the wall that shows it. That is currently under 200,000. The U.S. Census, 2020 U.S. Census was completed. They are in the process now of defining how those urbanized areas are going to be reshaped as a result of the 2020 U.S. Census. We are awaiting those redefined urbanized areas, which we expect to come in the summer. And depending on how the Manchester urbanized area is drawn after that, we may end up being over 200,000, depending on how that's drawn. So we're kind of in this weird limbo right now for the next few months until that next urbanized area definition comes out from the census, which again, we expect summer, roughly. We don't have a date certain, but we're expecting it, in the next couple of months.
Nate, just their map right.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah. That shows you the different urbanized areas.
So this kind of orange, dark orange that covers much of Bedford, parts of Goffstown, most of Manchester, up into Hooksett, Bow, Allenstown, Pembroke, that's the Manchester urbanized area. And then this yellow is the Nashua urbanized area. You can see how the Nashua urbanized area kind of creeps to the east of 93 to Derry and Windham. And so right now, the Nashua urbanized area is over 200,000, and they're considered a transportation management area, and have a variety of different requirements as a result of that. And we participate with our colleagues in Nashua to administer the metropolitan planning program that covers the Nashua urbanized area, but we encompass the entire Manchester urbanized area in our program as well. That's not to get too deep in the weeds, but that's it in a nutshell.
Sir, could you state your name and where you're from?
Kevin
please?
McHugh from Manchester. This is a question for Nate, actually. What's the criteria set? Is it strictly population? Is it geography? Is it
It's population density, and I believe the threshold, well, there's a few different factors that play into it. Zach can kind of explain it. I believe basically an urbanized area has to be, correct me if I'm wrong, Zach, an area that generally has a contiguous population density of 1,000 persons per square mile. And then on top of that, there are some other factors involving commuting patterns and other things that play into the designation for how they actually draw those lines. But at its core, there is a population density threshold that needs to be kind of contiguous.
Follow up, Mr. Chair, on that.
Go ahead.
How do you define the density breakdown in the different areas that you're talking about? I mean, who sets the criteria for these things? I mean, I'm just curious how it
The
works.
Census
because-
Bureau.
So it's population.
Population.
Right, it's strictly population.
And it's built off of census blocks, which are the smallest units that they drive, and they create them every 10 years.
So you take a town like Derry, which is a fairly large town, spread out quite a bit. So half of it would go to Nashua and half would come to Manchester.
I don't think
area, the
it's,
urban area.
I don't think it's split.
So, I mean,
The whole process itself is kind of, it's public in the sense that there's a federal register where they put out the actual process. But to be able to see exactly how it plays out, it's pretty complicated because it's an iterative process where they actually have, okay, you need this much population and surface area, paved surface area, and then they look at commuting and they place the different points, place the different blocks with different communities and try things out. Ultimately, it's pretty obscure because it is a very complicated process, but you kind of have to,
that nobody understands.
yes.
And any other questions? Yes, please.
Thank you.
Name
You brought
and,
up, Richard Tripp, Gary, you brought up an interesting thought there, and that Gary is part of the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission, but we're part of the Nashua urban area. It seems like, our representation is in the wrong area. We should be part of the Nashua Regional Planning Commission, since we're part of the Nashua urban area. How does that work? Because we're not represented.
That's, there's nothing on the federal side that talks much about member communities of these urbanized areas. So that can be decided upon by the communities themselves through the MPO and DOT as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think after that whole designation of what the Nashua urbanized area currently looks like happened after the 2010 census. I think there was a lot of head scratching that happened within this region as to how, based on commuting patterns and transportation network connectivity, that those communities would be included in the Nashua urbanized area. It didn't seem to make sense logically that based on the connections of the I-93 corridor commuting back and forth to Manchester and into southern Massachusetts. I think this commission had significant thoughts about that following the 2010 census. I wasn't here at that time, but I've heard about the comments that were submitted with concerns about that designation. It is entirely possible that designation changes because of the 2020 census and what we see in the summer. But beyond that, we work closely with our colleagues at the Nashua urbanized or Nashua MPO. We have an MOU with them. We make sure that the communities of Derry, Londonderry, and Windham are appropriately getting the funds that are programmed and funneled through the Nashua urbanized area and support projects within those communities. So we work very closely to make sure that, despite the way that particular urbanized area is drawn, that the communities in our region are getting their, every cent that they should in terms of sub-allocated transportation funding. And our colleagues at Nashua MPO have been very good to work with on that. And again, the designation of that may change entirely in a couple of months.
So
when the new 2020 figures come out.
Leigh, you referenced, and then we're going to go to the next group is to the people that are calling in remotely. Leigh, you mentioned about the urban areas like Boston and everything. Would we be competing because the greater Boston, and correct me from the more intelligent people on this subject, jump in if I'm wrong, the greater Boston Urban Transportation District stretches into southern New Hampshire. Would we be competing with funds from Boston?
There are some, those areas in New Hampshire that are covered by this Boston urbanized area, big Boston urbanized area, are eligible areas for Boston urbanized area funds to support projects. And so there's some coordination that occurs there as well. The money comes in through the New Hampshire DOT. And if there's funding that comes to New Hampshire DOT that is identified as Boston urbanized area funds, it has to be spent in those locations in New Hampshire that are involved in the Boston urbanized area.
Great, thank you. Is there anyone calling in remotely that would like to ask Leigh a question?
Someone had a question in the chat box.
No, that was James, and he was just putting the information.
Okay.
There was a question in the chat box.
Urbanized
There was a separate question.
So
There was a question. Marcus had a question.
any questions from someone calling in from the outside, from the remote?
Yeah, it looks like Marcus possibly on.
Do you see it?
There you go. What is the target deadline?
Oh, well, the law was passed.
What have you, can you read the question?
So the question is, what is the target deadline for these changes to be implemented? The law was passed in November 15th, I think. So this is law now. But as I mentioned, the one thing we were waiting on was for this year was the full apportionment of federal funds. We've been operating on a continuing resolution for a while. And so I think now we have the full apportionment of funds for this current fiscal year. The current fiscal year is included in this legislation. So you'll be seeing more guidance, more notices of funding opportunities, etc. They'll be coming out. They'll be trickling out here, I think, a little bit quicker now that we have our full year portion funds for the current federal fiscal year. So there's, we're kind of in a wait and see posture right now as these programs develop and as rules are established, or the making process. Eventually we'll get more information. We'll make sure we get that out to everybody.
Is that how the same?
I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, I get you. So the follow-up from Marcus, was there any target date?
There's really no target date in terms of this is the date that we'll have, this program will be made available at this point in time. The discretionary grants will each have their own probably deadlines.
Equitable representation of this.
Okay, so the question is more than just the funding. I'm curious about the equitable representation portion of this. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of emphasis, current administration on equity. And so you have some programs, and I'm sure, we'll be hearing more about, that focus. Some of the programs are specifically that I talked about are specifically focused on equity. The program that is specifically providing funds to reconnect disadvantaged minority communities that were impacted negatively by previous infrastructure investments is one of them. But equity, I think, as a concern is going to we'll probably see that concept applied across the board when it comes to formula, discretionary grants, all of it, I think is something that we're going to see a focus on. As we get the rules and the guidance comes out, we'll see more of that and how that develops.
We have one last question from Marcus, and then the last question will be from someone in the room. Marcus, would some?
I can't see it, so.
My question has just been when.
Not sure, Marcus, if you could.
Maybe you could just ask
Yeah,
Marcus.
you can.
Just unmute yourself.
Okay, I'll take another question for you here in the room.
Brian Clement, I got a technical question, I guess. How's our electrical system gonna stand up to all this extra demand on battery charging and stuff like that? Are they prepared to make that extra load?
To whom are you directing the question?
Well, anyone, I guess. It's a technical question. Has anyone given that any thought?
Yeah, the folks that are working on the deployment plan that I mentioned, they are giving that some thought because there are limitations in the grid that might make it difficult to fully deploy. So
I'm not sure what Marcus is saying. He's not allowed to
it says
unmute.
everyone's muted.
I don't, that's not what we do.
Sylvia, I'm able to mute and unmute. I don't seem to have any problem.
Marcus, we we just have everybody unmute themselves. I haven't added a control to mute you. So
Was it *6?
I keep pushing ask to unmute, which I,
So tell him how to do it. Tell him to click over his microphone on his little picture and right click it until it says the little dots. Tell him to go to the little dots and pull it down and unmute, right?
I think he has tried that and for whatever reason, he's unable,
I
so.
think the *6 is if you're on a phone.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't think he's on a phone.
Okay.
There is a couple of documents at the PUC around the charging.
Could,
And,
please,
they're
could we
working
have one conversation going? Peter, could we have one conversation,
with-
please?
There's some dockets at the PUC around charging and infrastructure planning for
Really
the grid.
annoying.
And a lot of the utilities are proposing time of use rates to push more of the charging off
Okay.
the peak periods, but for the fast charging on major roads, they're gonna have to make some big investments on the grid.
I feel we're running low on time. Leigh, if you have any final comments, I'm going to bring this debate to a close. I think the information, discussion to a close. I think the information will be available on the website or there have been documents handed out here. If there's anyone that's having trouble in becoming unmute, perhaps you might want to call in during the day and just speak with someone that could give you better instructions.
So Marcus just left and came back. Maybe he has a better shot now.
Yeah, leaving and coming back seems to have resolved it. Sorry about that. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. I've just brought this discussion to a close because we really have to move on to the.
Yes.
Marcus, I'm
Sure,
sorry.
okay.
Leigh, thank you so much.
Thank you. And there's a handout here that has some more specific information about New Hampshire.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other business to come before the MPO? Not seeing anyone wish to speak? Yes. We have a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Now call to order as Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission. Could I have both a roll call and an approval of the action of minutes of February 22nd? Is there a motion to approve? Yes. Okay, is there a second? Second, okay. Sylvia, could you do the,
Here we go. And we do have a couple of new folks. So if I miss someone, please speak up at the end. Bill Herman, Auburn.
Here and yes.
Thanks, Bill. Bedford, Bill DeShaco.
Here and yes.
Charlie Fairman.
Here and yes.
Danielle Ivanzik.
Yes.
And Candia L. Hall.
Here and yes.
Chester Andrew Haddock.
Here and abstain.
Deb Munson. Here, yes. Deerfield, Bob Cody.
Here and yes.
And Fred McGarry.
Here and yes.
Derry, Jeff Moulton.
Here and yes.
John O'Connor.
Here and yes.
Richard Tripp.
Here and abstain.
Francis Alfred Eisenberg.
Here and yes.
And Linda Kuhnhart.
Here and yes.
From Goffstown, Joanne Duffy. Joanne still with us?
Here and abstain.
Thanks, Joanne. David Pierce.
abstain?
Jacob LaFontaine.
Here and yes.
Thank you. Jacob, for the record, were you here for the whole MPO portion as well?
No, I attended late, probably about halfway through the presentation.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
For our record. No, it's okay, just for our record. The Londonderry, Brian Battaglia.
Here and yes.
Deb Levins. Deb. Give me a thumbs up, that'll work.
Here and yes.
Thank you. Arthur Rugg.
I am here and yes on the minutes.
Thank you. Mark Trugus,
Here and abstain.
Lynn Wiles,
Here and abstain.
from Manchester, Peter Capano,
Here and yes.
Ray Clement,
Here and yes.
Marcus Ponce de Leon.
Here and yes, I was here for the MPO also, but having obviously audio issues. So.
Thank you. Dan O'Neill.
Here and abstain.
And Don Waldron did join us.
Yeah, I just joined and here and yes.
Okay, Mark Sunan from New Boston.
Here and yes.
From Linden, Peter Griffin
Here and yes.
and Edgar Lapointe.
Here and abstain.
Did I miss anyone? Okay,
Okay, great, Sylvia, thank you. There is no old business. New business is Regional Housing Needs Assessment Update, and James Vayo will do the presentation on that.
I'm actually going to hand it right over to Tammy. Tammy, my colleague here, Tammy Zamoyski, did a great job putting together this presentation, has been leading a lot of the outreach efforts for the Planning Commission. And so she's put in all this hard work. So I'm going to defer to her for presentation, but I'll be here if there's any questions.
Thank you, James. We'll try to get through this as quickly as possible. So just in case you missed our last presentation, I want to go over real quickly what we covered. So this update is initiated by New Hampshire's Department of Business and Economic Affairs. The funds are being administered by the State Office of Planning and Development, and we are utilizing ARPA funds, which means that we have to spend them all by the end of the year. So our role in this is to perform an analysis of historical trends and existing conditions, as well as projections of future conditions and housing needs, identification of tools and techniques to further housing choices, and to create an inventory of housing solutions and resources to meet needs. Sylvia, did you want to say a word about this?
well, yeah, just really briefly, when it comes to housing, we know that it can get pretty emotional with people, with planning boards, with zoning boards of adjustment, and even with conservation commissions. And with residents who come to different, whether it's a master plan visioning session or it's a subdivision they may live next to. So things can get pretty emotional. And so when you're thinking about, when we're looking at existing conditions, we're also looking at existing attitudes. So what I'm asking everyone to do when they think about housing, not just about the home you live in, because I imagine that most people are housing secure here. But also, if you know of a young person in your life who's maybe out of college and looking for their first home, or you have someone you know, maybe a friend who's looking to downsize, or you're because they can no longer live in the larger home in their community and they're looking to downsize, maybe whether it's in your facility or just a smaller home that they can, maybe they need a wheelchair and they want to be able to just have single level living.
Sylvia, could I ask could you please, those calling in, please check your mute, and if it's not on mute, would you please mute yourselves? Because we're getting some feedback.
Yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead, Sylvia.
Anyway, just thinking of not just our homes, the idea is thinking about other people and how are they finding housing in your community or within the region. So just different scenarios. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sylvia. So we'll also be working with 2 different project consultants. Root Policy Research will be conducting a fair housing and equity assessment, and this helps us meet our statutory needs or requirements. And we'll also be working with RLS Demographics to work on a demographic projection. So today's update will include our survey responses so far, our outreach efforts, and our next steps. So I hope that you already know this by now, but we have been distributing 2 general public surveys, one in English and one in Spanish. We have set ourselves a goal to get 318 responses so that we have a comfortable margin of error. We currently, as of last week, have 231 responses, so we are still looking to collect at least 87 more to reach our goal. We've also been tracking where our responses have been coming from. So this chart on the right shows the responses by town by the percentage of the population. So we have good representation currently from Bedford, Chester, Francistown, Manchester, and New Boston. So now we know where to focus our outreach efforts for the remaining survey period.
I have a question.
Sure.
What is the -6% for Dairy Maine?
James, can you explain the how you calculated this?
Yeah, so we took the we took the total survey response and we broke out the amount of response we would need based on the population of the region. So, you know, Manchester has 100 and something thousand people. Derry has, you know, X thousands of people. And so there's a proportion of surveys we would like to receive from each of the towns that's sort of reflects the proportion of the region. And so,
let him finish.
So Derry is a little was a little down on response rate, but actually I sent out an email yesterday to George in the planning office over in Derry, and between George and Beverly, they've been doing a lot of outreach for me in the last couple days since Friday last week. And so this number is improving pretty quickly. But yeah, we were a little short on responses from Derry. So as much as possible, we're hoping each of these towns I hope this graph creates a little bit of competitive nature in you, and that you'll go out and help us procure the responses from your municipality so we can hit our goal of 318.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, James.
Not intuitive. but it answers the question.
So we've also been tracking how people are finding our survey. So for example, we have had 81 responses from the statewide press release that went out. We have 69 responses from all of our social media posts. We have 87 from our direct project website. And we have 7 from an equity stakeholder email list that we sent out. When we look at the respondents by age, we have a pretty fair distribution, leaning slightly older. So we do need to get some more survey responses from our younger populations. And in terms of income, it looks like we could use a few more responses from our lowest income residents as well. So I don't want to give anything too juicy away, but here are a few highlights from our general public survey so far. So 81% of respondents have a preference for living in a single family home housing type. Respondents feel as though their current housing meets their needs today. So 78% said that that's true. Only about half of respondents feel like their housing will meet needs for the next 10 years. And respondents are prioritizing price and safety when choosing a neighborhood. So in addition to the general public survey, we are also distributing an employer survey. We have 79 responses to date, and we sent out a direct email to the point of contact for all the businesses in the region. It was over 19,000 that are registered with the New Hampshire Secretary of State. So one of the things that we're finding out so far is that cost and availability are seen as the greatest factors hindering their ability to attract and retain workers. So this table on the right shows the business insights on the availability of housing options in the area where their business is located. So nearly 65% of businesses are saying that there are very limited housing options near their business for their workers. So we're also going to be hosting focus group meetings. The first one is for planners, and it will actually take place tomorrow. So we will be working with our planners to figure out what the community perceptions of housing are for each town, the master plan considerations of housing goals, local and regional factors affecting opportunities and limitations, consideration of community priorities for housing production, and we'll also be asking them to identify unique approaches in addressing local or regional housing goals. We will also be hosting additional municipal focus groups starting next month. So we will break this out into the city of Manchester. We'll have another group for Bedford, Goffstown, Hooksett, Londonderry, and Wyndham. And then we will have another group for rural communities such as Auburn, Candia, Chester, Deerfield, Francistown, New Boston, and Ware. Another way that we are reaching folks is through our housing needs assessment newsletter. We have 15 subscribers directly from our website right now. We have 15 from the employer survey and 87 from the public survey. And if any of you would like to sign up, you can do that at snhpchousing.org. Some more of our outreach efforts include the press release that was sent around in February. So that was distributed to 15 local and regional media outlets, as well as all of our state resources. We've been very active on Facebook. We have been posting frequently in our newsfeed. We've also boosted 2 of our posts. It was for the English survey and the Spanish survey. And we've been going and sharing information for people to get involved in all of the various community groups that exist. We've also been doing outreach to local and regional organizations through email, such as NeighborWorks, Southern New Hampshire, and Families in Transition. We've been printing and sending postcards to all of our town planners. The postcards have a QR code to the survey, so we're hoping to get those distributed throughout all of the communities. We've also been communicating through municipal emails to all of the town planners and officials. And we've been doing presentations just like this on the overview of the project for you guys, TAC, the Housing Commission in Manchester, and the State Committee on Aging. So finally, our next steps are to host those focus group meetings that I just mentioned. We'll close the survey after reaching our target numbers. Our staff is going to begin writing the draft report narrative. We are currently awaiting census information so we can get started on our data analysis. We'll be working with consultants on demographics and projections beginning next month. And then of course, we'll report back once we've compiled input from the public and the stakeholders. That was a lot of information and I went through it kind of quickly, so please let me know if there are any questions.
Any questions from here in the room?
Back here, Peter.
Yes. Yeah.
One thing that I see missing is New Hampshire Builders Association and people that are actually constructing this housing. I know in Chester, we put out a new ordinance that would allow affordable housing. But it seems in my observation that builders want to build the large expensive houses because that's what they always do. And perhaps they need a new way of looking at making money. But maybe they don't realize they can make money with affordable housing just the same as they make money off of big expensive houses.
I believe there is a survey that is just for builders, anyone involved in constructing housing. James, you want to add to that?
Yeah, there's some other groups that have been actively working with the state's builders to sort of identify what the barriers are to building affordable housing. Your observation is one that has been repeated many a time by many a different people. There is an acknowledgement that there's something is broken about the way housing gets built and that it seems to bias towards just serving the very top of the market. And that wasn't always the case. And so while we're doing these focus groups with municipal stakeholders, planners, elected officials, board members, we're actually going to be asking some questions about this particular issue. You know, like what are some of the local zoning or regulatory conditions that might be contributing to this? And are there examples of success stories or regulations that have been framed in a way that have produced positive results? And we'll be looking to report back on our findings after the focus group. So yes, I think your observation is a good one. I don't know what the lay of the land is because we haven't done the outreach yet, but once we do, we'll certainly report back what we hear, both from challenges and opportunities. And as the housing needs assessment matures and we start writing narratives, we're going to also be identifying solutions from a broader territorial area than just our region. We're going to be looking at what's been successful across the state, across the region of the Northeast, and then seeing, if those things are applicable to our region.
Yeah, I was just wondering if builders actually recognize that there is a need for the lower end housing and they just choose not to afford it, or whether they actually believe that the market is really for the, higher end.
Oh yeah, no, I think that's a great insight and sort of a great thought, and I think at least in my experience, my observation of talking with builders on this particular subject is that that often density limitations limit their ability to amortize the cost of a unit properly. So if they can't get enough units of a certain type onto a piece of land, then it's really hard for them to make their money back. So they go for the low density thing because that thing is a proven to generate a profit and a return for them. Whereas if they have to build low density, low cost, low rent or low for sale product, it's really hard to make it work within the confines of, say, a lot size limitation, or a floor to area ratio limitation, or an acreage limitation. And so this is why some of these things are playing out. At least that's what I'm hearing from builders. The other thing to note about the housing needs assessment is we're holding off on sort of doing detailed outreach with builders until we hear back from the general public and we have some data for analysis, because we actually want to get into sort of a more fine-grained, more detailed discussion with them about where exactly these challenges lie with them and how we can address them.
Are there additional questions from in the room? Yes, Peter.
I don't have a question. I just want to thank Tammy and James for coming before the brand new Manchester Housing Commission. Just a couple of weeks ago, their presentation was well received, and we want to help, and we look forward to getting the assessment at the end of the year. So thank you very much. You did a nice job.
Are there questions from people calling in? I don't see anyone wishing to ask any questions or comment. Thank you both very much for your presentation.
Move to adjourn.
No. Are there any public? Are there any public comments or commissioner insights? You've all been very insightful today. I guess you answered that question. Oh, would you like to make a motion to adjourn?
Yes, please.
And
Yes.
And yes, motion and second. All those in favor?
Thumbs up.
John?